Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of F1 This Week on Zach F1. Now, yes, I am wearing my hat backwards. Yes, it's because I've got wet hair at the minute, it's going all over the place, and if I wear my hat facing forward, the lighting's all off. However, we've got a lot to talk about as a lot has happened this week in F1. So let's get straight into it. First up, of course, we have to talk about the Canadian Grand Prix and what we have learnt. So it was a great race. I would say it was the best race of the season so far, in my opinion. I mean, we had Haas's masterclass at the start, going against everyone else's opinion, starting on the wets, getting Magnussen up to P4 by lap 3, which was incredible. Then, sadly, they did what is mostly common for Haas and then screwed up again, with Magnussen's tyres not being ready, which then dropped him down a lot more places. I really do believe Haas would have got points if it wasn't for that cock up right there. Hulkenberg did the same, but he didn't get as many places, so he sort of just went back into the midfield. Had a good race, but not as good as it could have been. And then we had Ferrari thinking they could do what Haas did. However, they went back to their true form with strategies that go beyond the human brain's comprehension. Then we also had Verstappen somehow still winning another race, even though he technically, for most of the race, was in the third fastest car on the grid. That really shows why he is the best driver on the grid right now. Both Mercedes drivers being quite frustrated after the race, as they knew this was a very big chance for one of them to get a really good result and potentially get a win. Very good considering the rest of the season they've had, so they kind of need to chill out a little bit. However, it is understandable as both Russell and Hamilton had moments in the race where they could have easily pushed a bit more, had a few less mistakes and potentially could have won. They had a lot more pace than McLaren's and Verstappen by the end of the race. Then to top all of the madness off, we also had another Norris driver of the day. Who would have seen that coming? And again, it's quite frustrating as especially in this race, I believe 2 drivers minimum should have got it over him. Those drivers were Verstappen and Ocon. Both had amazing races, and again, you're never going to get Verstappen getting driver of the day, and you're probably never going to get Ocon getting driver of the day because it is a popularity contest. And this is coming from a McLaren fan, so it's sad to see. However, Norris didn't have a bad race, coming second. It was good, but definitely not the best out of everyone who was racing in Canada. But by the race, there have been a few things that have been starting to be brought up in the F1 area that we do need to talk about. And first up is Russell not being good enough to lead Mercedes into this new era without Hamilton. So like I said, Russell definitely had a chance to win in Canada, and he did kind of flop it. Now, it wasn't just him, but it was the team. Mercedes kind of didn't get the strategies right. They kind of pushed their cars onto the dry tyres a little bit early. If they waited a few more laps like McLaren, they could have had a better fight with McLaren and not got stuck behind them. But all in all, he did have a good race weekend. 3rd place with a pole position, much better than where Mercedes have been. And surely that's enough to show he could lead the team. Well, it's not really true. Obviously, with Hamilton leaving, you're losing that championship mentality that Mercedes have had even when Lewis hasn't been winning championships. And when you get your first team driver being someone like Russell, it's not the same. Russell's only had 1 race win, and he tends to buckle under some pressure. Especially now, where we've been hearing all of these rumours, they might be true, they might be false, that Mercedes have really got the 2026 regulation engine right, which, if it's true, could be huge. And if Mercedes are the fastest car, can Russell deliver on a championship? I think so, if they do have a car like Red Bull had, where it's just so drastically better than the other cars. However, we do need to take into consideration that Russell does make a lot of mistakes. You had Canada 2024, he missed out on a race win. You had Australia 2024, where he wasn't really fighting for any of the big positions. He was only trying to overtake Alonso, but again, final lap, crashed out, bottled it, losing Mercedes quite a few points. Singapore 2023, where Mercedes again, like Canada, looked like they had the fastest car and again didn't get a result which they deserved, which would have probably been the race win on race pace. He crashed out on the final lap, losing that 3rd place that Mercedes would have really needed in that fight for the constructors, making it much closer for 2nd place going into the final few races. his fault again. And then on top of just ruining his own races, he does tend to crash into quite a few people as well. Again, Canada 2024, we saw Piastri and Russell collide into each other. We had Hamilton and Russell colliding again in Qatar 2023, Russell and Perez crashing into each other in Monaco 2023, Russell crashing into Sainz in 2022 in the Circuit of the Americas race, and more. But the thing is, not all of these crashes were his fault. It's just the issue where when a driver crashes into a lot of people, even if it's not their fault, it's a lot to do with their understanding of the car, where they're placing the car. Should they be going for this move when they don't really need to be going for it this early, or lunging into it where they shouldn't be? And that's just something that a more experienced driver wouldn't do, and that's why people are a little bit scared with Russell being the number one driver at Mercedes. So yes, on true pace, I think he definitely deserves to be the number one driver at Mercedes. Obviously in 2022 he outperformed Hamilton. 2024 he's 14 points ahead of Hamilton. 2023 we don't talk about on his points, he didn't do very well that season, but maybe he is just a bit too inconsistent to be the driver that pushes forward. Maybe that's why Mercedes need to invest into a young talent, or potentially a Spaniard who doesn't have a seat yet. But who knows? Only time will tell what happens with Mercedes going forward. Then moving on from Mercedes, we have to talk about the whole Perez situation and how he really does not deserve that contract extension. Basically, before the Canadian Grand Prix, it was confirmed that Perez will basically be staying with Red Bull until 2026. And for me, there's 3 words that describe this deal. A fucking disgrace. Now, before I rip into Perez, I will actually say the good things about Perez being a driver at Red Bull first. Now, there's not many, but there is a few that are the counter argument for Perez staying in that seat. Number 1, he is a very marketable driver. Only Central American driver on the grid, which really does help bring a massive fan base to Red Bull, as he is loved in Mexico, and it's just a massive market that Red Bull can tap into. So commercially and like financially, it's sort of a decent move to keep Perez there. 2, he is very clearly a number 2 driver. Now we've got a lot of positions in F1 now. Russell, Hamilton, we sort of know who the number 1 driver is, they don't really say. Leclerc, Sainz, we sort of know who the number 1 driver is, they don't really say. Norris, Piastri, Gasly, Ocon, Magnussen, Hülkenberg. I could go on. A lot of the teams don't really have a clear set number 1 driver, which does affect how the team works. There could be more arguments about it. And with Red Bull, Perez is definitely the second driver. He's always there to help Max Verstappen. He has helped Max Verstappen a lot. Obviously, he really helped him in that 2021 championship season to get the Drivers' Championship off Lewis Hamilton. So I can also see from a standpoint of keeping the team balance, it does work as well. And then 3, he did come second place in the championship last season. So surely he is a good driver, right? Well, I still don't think so, and here's the reasons why he shouldn't have got that contract extension. Number 1, this is very recent on his Red Bull career, but in the last 2 races, he hasn't even finished. Canada, he crashed out all by himself, had to go back to the pits, retire the car. Monaco, 50-50 with him and Magnussen. Again, though, crashing when he didn't need to, considering his qualifying. Not a very good idea, especially when these crashes do cost Red Bull quite a lot and could hurt their development. Number 2, he is currently 5th in the Drivers' Championship behind both Ferraris, Norris and Verstappen. Now, for a number 2 driver, even though Red Bull potentially aren't the fastest car on the grid anymore, they're definitely up there with Ferrari and McLaren on similar pace. However, you can't be 5th considering the first part of those 9 races, Red Bull definitely still were the fastest car. It's not acceptable. He's only on 107 points, and it's really hurting the team. It's really getting McLaren and Ferrari closer to Red Bull than they should be at this point of the season. Number 3 is he can't get into Q3 to save his life. Now, like I said, to have a second driver, it's good. You know, you've had the Barrichellos, you've had the Bottases who back up their main driver, but when your second driver can't even back up Verstappen because they're so far down the grid, it starts to become a problem. As your one driver at the top of the field can't defend as much with strategies compared to Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari have two drivers up there who can try alternate strategies to get closer to Verstappen. And just listen to these stats. He hasn't made it to the final part of qualifying in 2024 3 out of the 9 times already. That's a third of the races he hasn't been able to. And in all of those races, he's been only getting a few points or no points at all. And then in the most dominant car potentially F1 has ever seen, because of reliability, because of how fast it was and how many wins Verstappen got, he didn't get into the final part of qualifying a staggering 9 times. Now, last season this wasn't too bad because he had the race pace in that Red Bull to be able to overtake everyone and get up to like 4th to 8th position, which wasn't too bad, and it kept Red Bull comfortably in the Constructors' Championship winning. However, this season it's slightly different with the Red Bull not looking as fast as the rest of the grid. He's not getting these positions gained where he would have last season qualifying badly. And like I've already said, it's really hurting Red Bull's Constructors' Championship. Now, Ferrari aren't even close at the minute because they're just doing Ferrari things. However, if Ferrari would get that act together, they would be very close to Red Bull as well. Point number 4, he came second in the championship last season. Now, you might be thinking, I've already said that, and apparently that's a pro. Well, this is the issue. He got 285 points last season, only 51 points more than Hamilton in a Mercedes. Now, a lot of people use this he came second in the Drivers' Championship point to prove why Perez deserves that seat. But what a lot of people forget last season is we had so many different changes of who was the second fastest car, and Red Bull were always the dominant car. If anyone did beat Perez, it would have been a miracle, because Aston Martin at one point were the second fastest car, Mercedes at one point, Ferrari at one point, McLaren at one point, and they're all taking points off of each other, and that's why you saw them all score around 200 points. Now, in a season we've got coming up now, where we've only got Ferrari and McLaren, especially being on Red Bull's points, you can see already with him being 5th in the championship that he's losing out points, and he will definitely not be second place because the car's not as dominant. But also, second place in the championship, but less than half the points Verstappen had. That's right, he got less than half the points. Now, if Perez got more than 320 points that season, I would have said it wasn't a bad season for Perez. Obviously, Verstappen's in a different league, but he held his own in that Red Bull seat. But he just has not delivered enough, and everyone was saying it, and we're seeing it now. When Red Bull get caught up, he is not the driver you need. And this is exactly what's happening right now. And then I think the final point why Perez isn't someone you really want to be having in your team is there's just other drivers waiting in the wings, ready to go. So first off, you've got the easy option, Yuki Tsunoda in that V-Carb, who's just re-signed a contract, again, just before the Canadian Grand Prix, for an extra 1 year on his deal. However, he's ready to go. He's had 5 point scoring positions this season alone in a V-Carb. He's been outperforming Perez in the Red Bull, basically. It's a no-brainer with Tsunoda. And even if they didn't want him, they also have a certain Spaniard who is out of a seat next season, who they could easily have brought in and would have done a much better job than Perez. Now, Sainz probably wouldn't have wanted to be a second driver. However, being a second driver at Red Bull with a 1 year contract, maybe moving on to someone else, I 100% would tell you Sainz would take that over potentially going to a Williams, to be not even being the number 1 driver because Albon's already there. Now, to finish off this Perez argument, the thing is, a lot of people will say, I know, because people have been saying that because of Perez's financial reasons, that defeats every other point that is brought up about Perez's performances. But in my opinion, are you really telling me that, first of all, Perez isn't damaging the finances more by crashing out more, but secondly, that a top team like Red Bull couldn't be a top team without Perez's money coming in? I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. Finally, to end off this video, we also have a bit more news on the Sainz transfer drama, as he is officially Williams' #1 target. James Vowles has been going all over the place saying that he is the #1 driver that they want next season. He's been saying that there's 2 teams involved, so it's Williams and someone else. We could probably guess who it is. However, I doubt we'll be seeing any major news on this for quite a while until the summer break, purely because Sainz has even stated that he wants to be cautious, he'll take his time, he knows that there's teams waiting for him, so I think he wants to explore his options until the final minute and then sign with whoever's left, basically. But it does sort of mean that Sargent is gone. I mean, we've known for a while Sargent probably won't be keeping his seat, especially with him crashing a lot. He's costing Williams a lot, he's not getting the performances out, and it's sad to see another new driver just failing to compete in the sport. But especially with where Williams are, we might not even see them next season. I mean, Sargent crashed last weekend and Albon got collected by Sainz. Williams are really struggling financially and they can't take these crashes a lot more, and they're getting a lot. So who knows, maybe Sainz won't go there because they won't be a team. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. This has been F1 this week, and I'll see you all later for another F1 related video later down the line. Have a good week. Bye bye.